Beth, and thank you for your leadership here at the port. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back at Port Newark with Director Rooney, with business leaders like John Kennedy and Bill Foley, as well as Ray Sardetto, who's the Senior Vice President of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and others, to discuss a critical piece of legislation that is on the verge of passing in the Senate, the CHIPS for America Act. Now, some of you may be asking why Port Newark to discuss this legislation. What does a bill about chips have to do with ships? The answer is simple. It's supply chains. Amid containers going in and out of our state and our country, we're here to talk about the supply chain vulnerabilities that were laid bare by the COVID pandemic. For the past 2 years, there have been shortages, which is a key contributor to the rise in prices that have affected many families in America. If there was one image to sum it up, it's the photo of that container ship blocking the Suez Canal, one that disrupted international commerce and the lifeblood of industries around the world. Ships were rerouted, causing chaos and delays, all because there was a massive floating roadblock in one of the busiest sea lanes on Earth. In one visceral image, we just saw how interconnected the global economy is and how dependent we are from other countries when it comes to basic goods and services we once took for granted. Now, COVID didn't cause the ship to run aground. The chaos that resulted is emblematic, however, of the disruptions we have seen as a result of the pandemic. Surges in different countries have not only taken a tragic toll on communities around the globe, they have slowed production and the flow of goods that we all depend on, and that has increased prices. In short, we saw how much something happening halfway around the world can affect us here at home. More recently, we have seen the loss of Russian gas as a result of the war in Ukraine, 20 million tons of grain and agricultural products sitting in silos in Ukraine instead of getting to the global market has affected food prices, and American families have had to bear the costs. So that's why the CHIPS Act is an essential step towards strengthening our supply chain and making investments in the United States that will help us better withstand any future disruption. Over the last several years, we've seen domestic manufacturing, particularly in the field of semiconductors and microchips, shipped overseas. In the 1990s, we used to produce nearly 40% of all of those microchips here in the United States. Today, that just stands at around 12%. And in large part, this decline can be attributed to foreign players, including China, investing heavily to dominate a critical industry. Now, I know that most people, especially before the pandemic, wouldn't have paid much attention to news about microchip shortages. But as we all learned the hard way, microchips are in practically everything we depend on, from our cell phones to our washing machines, refrigerators, to cars and defense systems, just to mention a few. And when we see a chip shortage, we see parking lots full of brand new vehicles, cars ready to be sold, but they can't roll off the lot because they don't have a microchip the size of your fingernail. And with economic indicators suggesting that rising car prices are responsible for as much as a third of domestic inflation, improving our ability to produce and manufacture chips domestically has a direct link to reducing long-term inflation costs. Shortages like the one we now see grind industries and businesses to a halt, leaving our adversaries like China with the last laugh. It's a simple law of economics. When production plummets and the supply of goods is reduced, prices go up. That's why I'm thrilled that the CHIPS Act dedicates roughly $52 billion to shoring up our domestic semiconductor industry. Through these grants, tax credits, and other incentives, this legislation will help bring online new chip-making plants here in the United States, crucial to our economic future and national security. These investments in science and research will create good-paying jobs across industries all over the nation, and these investments will make us more competitive around the globe. But of all the benefits that's included in the CHIPS Act, there is one I'm especially proud to have offered and fought for: my bipartisan, bicameral Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or MEP, Supply Chain Database Act. John Kennedy's here representing D-N.J MEP, can tell you more about the incredible work that they do, but essentially what this bill, we wanted to scale the success we found in New Jersey to the national level. When the pandemic hit and quickly exposed deep vulnerabilities in our own supply chains, New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program was an indispensable resource for our manufacturers. Whether it was helping legacy manufacturers retool their operations for new products or connecting startups to supply chain partners, New Jersey MEP made a real difference in keeping businesses afloat. And when we sat down to discuss how we stay ahead of the curve so that we don't live through something like this again, John noted how the United States lacked any sort of nationwide supply chain database. As a nation, we are essentially in the dark when it comes to real-time information about American manufacturers' capabilities and their inventories. From that conversation, our National MEP Supply Chain Database Act was born. Once enacted, this database will help prevent future supply chain disruptions. It will generate benefits for consumers and families, for the manufacturing industry, and most of all, for our national economy as a whole. It will provide manufacturers the information they need to make decisions on the fly, meeting the demand for products such as defense supplies, food, and medical devices. Now, one other word about the CHIPS Act. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that some parts of this legislation in the course of its negotiation leaves out some key provisions to confront China. They included some that we passed last year, like my bipartisan Strategic Competition Act. Simply put, it is not and should not be a substitute for a comprehensive China strategy, and we're going to continue to work in this conference to make that part of it happen. But that said, the CHIPS Act is a good bill, a compromise that tackles a number of concerns that businesses, groups, and government agencies have shared for months, if not years. Through the legislation, we address vulnerabilities in our supply chains, we boost our domestic manufacturing capacity, and we better prepare our nation's economy for the 21st century. We take concrete actions to iron out the kinks in the supply chain that increase costs on American families. That makes our economy stronger and more resilient here at home, especially when it comes to the emergent technologies that are increasingly defining the 21st century, crucial both for our security and our prosperity. At a time when some doubt that Washington can get things done, the CHIPS Act is a major step forward. Finally, I want to make one thing clear since we're here at the port. This is a port that I have fought for since I became a congressman in 1993. I represented the port then in my district. I've represented it in the United States Senate. Bolstering domestic manufacturing isn't about taking business away from our ports. Rather, it's about diversifying our supply chains to make them more resilient and secure. In fact, the Port of New York and New Jersey is as busy as ever, moving records amount of cargo in recent months and cementing its status as the busiest port on the East Coast, if not one of the busiest in the entire nation. In Washington and here at the port, we're continuing to prioritize investments that will facilitate the efficient flow of goods. Investments to improve safety and efficiency, like a project to further deepen the channel leading into the Port of New York and New Jersey. Combined with these upgrades and other measures being taken by the Port Authority, the CHIPS Act is a crucial piece of the puzzle towards alleviating supply chain woes. Less supply chain problems we have, the more we can control costs. And most of all, though, it's a sign that as we work towards bringing our economy back, toward addressing the economic challenges we face, we are delivering solutions to help families and businesses in New Jersey and all across the nation. I'll end with this. Just last week, we celebrated 53 years since Neil Armstrong first walked on the moon. I remember watching it live, glued to the TV as he took that one small step for a man. That moment, the image of the American flag on the moon is seared in our country's conscience. It's the most poignant example of what we can accomplish together as one nation, as one people. Threats to our supply chains affect every American, Democrat, Republican, Independent. But passing one bill is not a silver bullet solution. Frankly, there are no silver bullets here. But we can come together to talk about a bipartisan piece of legislation with leaders in this space who are working to unleash our greatest economic potential. And I have no doubt we can continue to come together to deliver solutions. So I want to thank you all. Before I turn over to John Kennedy to say a few words on behalf of New Jersey MEP, I understand that our friends from Telemundo